Well, right now we're talking about sustainability in AV, balancing innovation with eco-conscious practices. I have to say, pretty much at every conference that I've been to this year, irrespective of the industry, sustainability has been somewhere on the schedule. And that's because this is an era where sustainability is no longer a choice, but it is a necessity. To moderate this panel on adopting practices that align with environmental stewardship, an award-winning marketing leader with hands-on experience deploying marketing and communication strategies for global tech companies and startups in the USA and Australia, the marketing manager with Axis Communications, it's Devyani Sharma.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining. It's the last session, so I know you're really hanging in there for the drinks in the afternoon, but we promise we've got a really great lineup of speakers tonight. I've got Rich on my far left. He's come from Cisco. He's come all the way from Europe just for this talk, right, Rich?
Just this talk, yeah.
Just for this talk, right?
Nothing else.
I've also got Pete from Mott MacDonald here with some fantastic words of wisdom around sustainability in the AV industry, and Nathan here from QSys as well. So I think it's going to be a really great discussion. And, you know, I think it's going to be very interesting in terms of sustainability in the AV industry. As we really navigate all the complexities around, do we innovate or do we focus on being eco-conscious, right? Does one hinder the other? So we're going to talk about that. And our panel are really going to explore how the AV sector can contribute to a more sustainable future, all the way from the sourcing of the materials down from there, all the way up from the entire life cycle of the product and going beyond that. So you really get an insight from literally the actual raw material all the way to how we see the future looking like from an AV perspective. So I really want to kickstart things. First and foremost, I think it's really important that let's sort of level set in terms of what is sustainability in the AV industry, right? Can each of you, help us define that, what it means, as we go towards more greener practices? How do we kind of look at that? How can each of us kind of define it? And what are some of the key factors and the enablers of sustainability within the AV industry? Rich, let's kick it off with yourself.
Yeah, so I kind of break it down in two ways. I think it's looking at how the product's being built, like what you mentioned about sourcing the material to packaging to shipping to a customer, but also it's like how did the actual product, from a recycling standpoint, reusable standpoint, power usage. There's kind of like both sides of the apple, so to speak. And like I think from outside, we are looking at that end-to-end journey and kind of looking, everyone has scope emission targets, the global emissions, the Paris Climate Agreement. We're trying to really, comply with that. And we're trying to like really try and solve that all the way through. And I think that's a really big important part is that it's not just, doing this for fun. It's not doing this because it ticks a box. We actually are trying to create a difference in the environmental impact that we have as a company and companies who use our products.
Fantastic. Pete?
Yeah, so building on what Rich touched on there, I think it's thinking about it from the design perspective as a consultant as I am, and really trying to work out at each stage, what practically can I do to reduce the impact? So that might be about designing with less equipment. It might be about designing with equipment that has a longer life cycle that can be better supported. It might be about thinking about upgrade paths. And certainly for me, right at the end of the lifespan of a particular piece of equipment in a particular application, not thinking of that as end of life, but thinking of it as end of current life and saying, where can I then deploy that? Is it possible to take it to another environment? Maybe it's no longer in a premium corporate environment, but it can go down into, possibly a charitable organization or something else. So really looking forward and thinking about that whole question as you design, as you consider, what am I going to deploy?
Fantastic. And Nathan?
I think that really segues well into what my particular focus has been, I guess, working for a distributor. A lot of the time we're just trying to do the basic stuff of like electrifying our processes at, as a distribution company, logistics, that kind of thing. But we really find ourselves at the messy reality end that is e-waste, is end of life stuff that is beyond the ability to reuse or, we've got a service department who we can kind of say, look, if this could work, can you fix it? And then we can give it to somebody to use, like as you've suggested. But I mean, the reality is, I think that it's a very, very messy problem, and it's very challenging. And I think that's what interests me in being involved in. I think that's definitely something we should not pretend isn't a thing. Like sustainability in AV is messy, but yeah, that's also the challenge that I'm keen to, and I'm here, to look into further.
Yeah, and that's why you guys are the specialists that you are in your particular field and your companies. And I think it's really important to have a context setting around the net zero greenhouse emissions targets by 2050, because I think that is really that foundation for so many organizations and individuals kind of moving towards that mindset as well. So thank you for setting that stage. I want to dive deep into, Rich, you mentioned around the sourcing of the actual raw material, like the basis of a product. It's an incredibly important part. And I know for Axis, the company I work for, it's an incredibly important part. Now, the AV industry relies heavily on so many materials, right? We're talking plastics, metals, and the ethical sourcing of it, right, is becoming increasingly important. Can you kind of talk us through from your perspective on that?
Yeah, so I think you hit the nail on the head there. Like when it comes to sourcing material, we're always looking at how do we minimize the impact on the environment where we're sourcing from and manufacturing from. And obviously there's conflict regions out there, there's trade embargoes, there's other aspects that we have taken into consideration. I can talk about from the Cisco perspective, we have an amazing supply chain team that really goes out there, and it's not just one person. It's 50, 60, 70 people every day talking to suppliers of materials and make sure that they're meeting our expectations that we're setting, that we can stand behind our products and say that this material has been sourced from a sustainable approach or from a non-conflict zone, etc. But I think it is a challenge which has become more to the forefront recently. I think, before it's just kind of been obscured away from the process, but now customers are really interested in this. I've been here today speaking to a lot of customers, and sustainability is a hot topic and it gets talked about, and they're very, very interested in what are we doing about impact in that, all the way from design aspect of that material. And let's say one example around material sourcing is glue. We're trying to remove all glue from the product, because when you put glue on any surface, that surface cannot be recycled. So we're trying to move away from, and right now in the AV industry, a lot of things are glue. Honestly, they are. And we've tried to move as much as possible. We're not perfect, but we've done a lot of work in that regard to make things more clickable. You can pick up a metal faceplate, you can click off. We also look at the process of how that metal can also then be recycled and reused, back to what you're saying earlier, Pete. But I think it's really important that you have a team out there. I think people should really understand it's all the companies here, who make products we are really seriously thinking about that. We are going into China to locally meeting distributors, seeing actually their processes. We have to actually validate a supplier and see their product line to make sure that it does meet and tick the boxes correctly.
Amazing. That's amazing. Pete, I know you got the end customer and a consulting view on that one.
Yeah, and look, I think I'll also say that it's very easy as you start to think about all the different initiatives that you could undertake to become overwhelmed. So an area that I really try and focus on is the decarbonisation question. Again, as we've already started to touch on, a lot of organisations, a lot of governments have made major commitments around decarbonisation, and that's been great. But what we've seen over the last 18 months is people then beginning to say, so what did I sign up to? What does this mean? A quick recap. I'm not sure how familiar everyone is with scopes 1, 2, and 3, but scope 1 is basically stuff that you burn yourself. So gas or oil or diesel or whatever, coal. So if you burn some of that stuff, that's scope 1. So for many people, that's relatively easy to avoid in a lot of organizations. Just maybe turn off the gas. Scope 2 is then other people burning stuff on your behalf to make energy. Again, in terms of the rise of renewables and green power and so on, you can tick that box relatively easily. So that's kind of why you've seen a lot of people go, hey, scope 1, scope 2. But that leaves us with scope 3, which is everything else. And that literally means all the things that you consume or produce, depending on your point of view, in your organization, which includes all the technology we're talking about. So this microphone, that screen, these lights, everything fits into scope 3. And the big challenge is that right now, nobody can say with great certainty how much carbon's in that screen or in those lights or this microphone. So in order to be able to move that forward, one of the things I advocate very firmly for is just beginning to understand that number. We announced last year an indicative number you can use. I'll mention it again, 25 kilos per square meter for a corporate fit out. So if you have no other idea, you don't want to pursue individual products, you can at least start saying, well, it's a 10,000 square meter fit out, therefore I've got 250,000 kilograms equivalent of CO2 committed just in terms of the products that arrive. That's before I'm talking about energy consumption and so on. But so that's really the key theme for me, because you can see, again, if you start to bring many different factors together, most people become overwhelmed and then inclined to say, this is too hard. So my real message there is you actually can account for carbon, and you can then start to purchase offsets, and you can then give yourself the motivation to think about, how do I mitigate that?
If you can measure it, then you can change it, right?
Exactly.
Nathan?
Yeah, look, I tend to agree with that approach. Yeah, if you can measure it, you can change it. We have taken that, I think before I even started, what attracted me to working for Technical Audio Group or ICC Australia was that they had a really firm commitment to doing what they could, right? It wasn't taken as one big thing. It was like incremental changes over time, looking at, we do mostly sea freight and then we do air freight in these situations, kind of saying, you know what, we're not going to do air freight anymore. Just like, we can't do that. So that's like incremental changes like that. And then, sourcing all of our own energy from a huge solar array we have at a new warehouse, and then working out how to kind of use that to offset other offices that can't have solar, or working out power purchase agreement kind of situations to be able to reduce our carbon footprint from I guess a scope 1 perspective. Actually, we bought an 8-ton EV truck a couple of years ago to kind of stop using third-party logistics companies. That ended up being a good thing, because when we were using third-party logistics companies, we couldn't. We had this actual functional problem from a business perspective, separate to sustainability. That was that if a driver couldn't get a hold of a customer, they would just move on to the next thing, and we can be a lot more flexible with our own kind of doing that ourselves. So we started looking into that, and when we first did that, we actually couldn't find any warehouse staff that were willing to drive the truck. They were just too scared, because it was quite an expensive investment. And we actually had to get one of the owners of the company, or to, he basically drove the truck for a few months just to deal with that problem. So now we've got somebody on board who's doing it. We're getting daily updates on all the running around they're doing. But on the back of it, it says driving towards net zero. And I kind of said to them, I was like, this is a commitment to net zero, right? And they're like, guess it is. Guess you're going to have to work that out for us, aren't you? So that's something that we've been working through. It's just been quite interesting, gathering up all of the different kind of streams. I mean, we're a relatively small company. So I'm definitely going to need to get some outside help to kind of fulfill this in a proper way. But meanwhile, we've got a lot of initiatives coming in. We're developing our own e-waste breakdown facility, which on paper is absolutely insane, because there's companies that do this already. But it allows us to kind of appreciate what we are doing, what we are putting out there when we sell this product or that product, or like back to Rich's comment about trying to get rid of glue. That's one of the kind of higher aims of this particular breakdown facility, is like, all right, we're going to start pulling things down and breaking them into their constituent material flows, working out the right place for the best place for those outputs to get to. If we haven't got a good one, we've got a lot of warehouse space, so we just stockpile it. But yeah, things like glue, getting that feedback channel back to our suppliers to say, hey, we're working on this, but these things really suck to break down. We can't recycle them. Nobody will take them. And having that feedback channel, is really important. Kind of wanted to talk about that because that's a more recent thing we've been doing. But yeah.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. And I actually really like the points that you've made, especially around the glue and the actual components that go into building the products and the actual raw material, because the example that I spoke to you guys about was, the London bombings and what actually happened inside the train terminals. It was not the actual bombing that killed majority of those people. It was the fumes coming out of the PVC that was in all the plastics within the tunnels. So the materials that are sourced and how we use them, how they're put together, it's an incredibly important part that you've touched on. And also to Rich's point, now these days we're finding more and more tenders that are coming through many of them are looking for a percentage that's focused on sustainability, and they're looking for that green tick from their vendor or manufacturer or whoever it might be. So really interesting, guys. I want to move into, we've gone from materials. I want to go into actually building the product, which many of you are familiar with. And, from a manufacturing practices standpoint, sustainability has an incredibly significant play in that: energy consumption, durability of the product. What are some of the strategies that we can do from an AV manufacturer, AV industry standpoint that could really help move the needle?
So I can start there a little bit. So at Cisco, we actually have a sustainability score for each product. If it doesn't reach a certain threshold, you can't ship it. So it doesn't even get released to the world. There's products out there, and actually a prime example, back to the glue, sorry to bring it back, but that is actually something we did. We had a product where the designer put glue in to secure the fitting, and by doing that, we dropped below our target sustainability score for our product. We said, no, go back, designer, find a better way to do it that doesn't use glue. So we had to go back and re-innovate. Delayed the project 2 months, but it was the right choice to do. So it's having those checkpoints in your process to be like, okay, is this the right thing? Another option that I see out there is chrome. Anything with chrome is also, you cannot recycle that. You put one piece of chrome on a device, let's take a room system or a mini room system, a piece of chrome can completely ruin that sustainability aspect of that product. So you're going to be conscious of every component all the way through. And I think on our side, what we're trying to do as well is be more reusable with components. Mm-hmm. So be more modular. We were talking about this story a little bit earlier outside, is modularity. You've seen out there in the industry, a lot of phone companies or other companies try to put modularity on the customer's choice. You can go and you replace your camera, you can upgrade this, upgrade that. And that's an okay approach. But actually, if you reverse that and look at how we build stuff, we should be building things with less components, less points of failure. That's more durability, more sustainability in that approach. So, and at Cisco in particular, we're looking at our camera lenses. How can we build a one camera module that can be used in every product? Mm-hmm. So then that means we have less materials we source. It also means that we don't have to look at the issue of breakage or repairs and reusable, because then when we have products come in to get refurbished, we can refurbish those modules and use them in any product. Mm-hmm. So there's a benefit to the actual vendor here as well. Yes, there's a massive benefit to the user and the thing, but from a vendor, it can really optimize your processes if you do it the right way. So don't look at sustainability as oh, we have to do that. Mm-hmm. Actually, we're embracing it, and it's a way that actually change our processes to be better.
Amazing.
And I think I'd pick up then that point around the title we're speaking to, which is that innovation opportunity. You start with all the topics that we've begun to touch on, and you think, wow, that is hard. And I mean, it's laudable, the kind of work that you guys are doing at that global level and that you guys are doing at the local level. But then, Devyani, as you said, it's making sure that that's recognized in some way by the client, and that is rewarded or encouraged, even understood at all. So I think there's a real journey there, but an opportunity in terms of, again, thinking about the more pervasive that technology becomes. When we come back to the briefing and design process, it's more economically sustainable as well if we're finding a way to deliver more efficiently, more reliably over a longer time period. And that leads back to, Rich, you were just beginning to touch on it there, I think, as well, that flight to quality, and saying, actually, no, we're going to raise the bar here, and there is a reason, and there is a reward, and there is a payoff. So I think that's kind of part of the challenge for all of us as the industry, is to really promote those elements and make sure that they start to be more front and center. And certainly for us, in terms of, a lot of my time now is spent briefing for smart buildings across, every facet of technology you could imagine. But we bring that back to three main elements, which is experience, operations, and sustainability. And, we deliberately bring sustainability right up there alongside those other two key components to say, you have to be thinking about this right from the get-go. When you're designing, when you're briefing, when you're scoping, it has to be there from the beginning, so that then as it flows through, we are recognizing manufacturers, distributors, integrators, service providers who are committing to that.
I love it. What was that? Experience, operation, and sustainability. Yep. Awesome.
Thank you.
I'm obviously going to support a move to quality, as both I think Rich and our brands can are often seen in the industry as, higher capital cost, but longer lifespans, generally both upgradable via software, things that can last longer. through software like life cycles as opposed to hardware. Like a QSys Core 10 is like Core 110 is over 10 years old now, but can still run the latest software. It's that kind of thing that I think often, at least in the kind of tenders and things I see in education, is a factor, but not a very large one. I mean, I think, and this isn't saying anything about the education sector, but they're just the tenders I happen to see. Tell me if I'm wrong from what you see, but I find that the sustainability kind of clauses in these tenders have very little teeth, if any, or they are like 1%, 10% kind of weighting, or even less.
And I'd say, I mean, that takes me back to certification 15 or 20 years ago, when people were starting to say, oh, you should be certified as a professional, and people are like, well, what will I put in the tender? And so you end up with these sort of aspirational but very wishy-washy elements. And there's a real push-pull. I said 18 months ago that we were going to start putting a carbon column in all of our bills of material to be responded to along with the dollars column. But we realized very quickly that, that was just going to torment the contractors trying to actually fulfill those tender submissions in limited time and everything else. So we kind of pivoted and said, okay, well, let's talk to the manufacturers instead. Let's do our own calculations. Let's try and start to have some front end figures like that 25 kilos a square meter. I'll keep saying that and hope people will remember it and take it away. Because it was really building that up. I mean, so often people put aspirational things in tenders, but underpinned by nothing, and then wonder why no credible outcomes delivered. So I think it is really important in this process that we start to pick and identify elements. And learning about the glue piece has been really interesting for me. That wasn't something I was at all aware of.
Yeah. Maybe I'll add a little bit on the RFPs. I have a more global view of this as well. So I think you're right. RFPs didn't have a lot of teeth around sustainability. Like what we saw is that customers and vendors out there were looking at sustainability as more of a checkbox exercise 3-4 years ago. Is anyone aware of they called the Gartner hype cycle? Have you ever seen that graph? Mm-hmm. I think sustainability went through that. I think sustainability was like really hyped up. It kind of like died off a little bit, like in terms of that, but now all the real work's happening. Mm-hmm. And now we're coming back to where it needs to be. So now I see RFPs out there where, they want to understand, they want data to back it up. It is honestly attached to budget at the end of the day. Like, there is budget in companies out there to invest in sustainable technology, but before it was just almost like thrown away. And now they're actually looking for the data to back it up. And an example, like, Pete, you mentioned around the carbon use, I actually looked into our processes before flying out here and realized that actually 6 months ago, we started producing these documents, so that we can provide them in RFPs so that people can see, this is exactly how the process is built. And the other thing I'm going to add as well around this is more around talent, actually. I was having a chat with, this is completely a little bit off topic, but on topic. I was having a chat with someone around the generation of the workforce. And the fact is that more than 50% of the workforce is millennial or Gen Z. I have half my team is probably I would class as Gen Z in that regard, and they really care. They don't want to work for a company that isn't really doing this. Like if you're just doing word mouth and just playing it, they'll find out within a couple of days. It's you can't hide that stuff. But they actually really care, and I think it's up to us. And I cross kind of generational boundaries a little bit, but I think it's up to us to make sure that we're doing things that not just for us, but also for the future generations that are going to be on this earth as well.
Definitely. There is a lie detector out there with the new generation. And I think this idea of greenwashing, we're seeing that a lot. And it's like, you're right, it went down. And then definitely, I think, and that's why folks like you and, folks in the room here today, I think the guys that are really working towards sustainability now are the real trailblazers and are actually going to make the real impact for the coming decades. We only have 30 years left or something like that, 25 years left to get to that net zero. So
I'm going to say that's a bit depressing for a second.
Good luck to us. Definitely. I really want to jump into the usage, right, from a life cycle perspective and really talk about it from the end user standpoint. And, how can any end users or any users of AV products in the audience? Yep, we got some. So how can, the end users adopt sustainability practices and in particular, the power saving, other utility efficiencies that they can really look at so they can really drive the human and the bottom line impact of sustainability, because ultimately, if we can measure it, we can change it. So what do you guys think?
I wouldn't mind talking about this for a little. While I was still at University of Sydney before I moved to my current job, I spent a lot of time doing this. I was looking overnight, was using the power controllers we used at the time would give you a readout of power and kind of getting right into the detail on what devices used what and kind of taking snapshots because it was the most kind of, I don't know, the only way I had it, only approach I had. And after a little while, I worked out that it's like usually one device in a room that's really killing it, and everything else is kind of the juice ain't worth the squeeze sometimes, if you will. But then I also kind of took that to the, at that time I was doing a lot of greenfields builds and kind of talking a lot with the building management team and saying, guys, this is the thing. What can we do? And they were like, I don't know. A lot of them were kind of like, look, we if we have renewable energy, like, does it matter as much? And it was a hard argument because it's like, if you do have a fully renewable grid, then like, yeah, you shouldn't just use more power because you have it, but it does become perhaps like, okay, it's like, yeah, I've spent a lot of nights looking at this, guys, but like, I do understand that you have to channel your energy where you've got it because there's a finite resource of that energy, a finite number of people who want to get involved in it. So I don't know, that was definitely a fun thing. I mean, the answer was that, basically you turn your projectors off the second people stop using the room, and like that's going to do most of your energy saving. We never did any lead, so I couldn't really talk to the amount of energy use of lead wool because we just weren't doing it. But that was a particular aspect that I was really like focusing on.
Yeah.
And then trying to automate systems to turn them off. And I did do a lot of reaching out to all the vendors we used at the time and said, hey, I'm going to turn your device off every night at this time. Will you still warrant it? And everybody said, yeah. Like nobody was, not many were just saying, yep, no problems. It'll work perfectly fine.
Yeah.
So there's a bit of fear around that as well. In the end, I don't think we implemented too much other than just like reducing automatic shutdown timers and things like that. And there's a lot better ways to do it with sensor technology these days.
And I think building on that, in some ways, you can actually see that we've had success already over the last 10 or 15 years, going from people often not turning anything off at all and not even being sure what its state was, to increasingly turning things off or things having automated capability to turn themselves off. And so actually, in many ways, when I worry about the various aspects of the impact, I worry less now about energy because I think we've done that quite well. As you said, the juice isn't always worth the squeeze in terms of the remainder. And if you do have green power, then great. That's a good way along, because you have to not get to this existential point where you go, all technology is bad, and they go, oh, hang on, humans make technology. Maybe it leads you to a pretty dark place. So I think you go, that's not where we're trying to go here. What we are trying to do is to be responsible and well considered in these areas. And I think the next challenge, having addressed energy management increasingly well, is this question of the material impact and bringing the items to wherever that place is, this building, whatever, that life cycle use, and then the consideration at the end. So for me, in some ways, back to the innovation theme, we should pat ourselves on the back a little bit and say, hey, we have made some good progress here, and this is just the next step. Because again, I see so often people just start feeling overwhelmed by this stuff. They feel overwhelmed, they feel bad, they feel confused, and then they think maybe I'll just forget about that. So it's actually that mission of saying, don't forget about it. Do think about the bite-sized chunks that you can take.
Actually, I'm going to say a controversial statement maybe here. Like, I don't think the end user should have to think about it. I think as the AV industry and vendors should do majority of the thinking about it. And I can do the real life example here. So we have this device called the Board Pro. It's a big integrated LED screen, a full video conferencing system. And we implemented what we call network standby, which is a new EU regulation coming out. We produce it before the regulation comes into play. And we just recently turned it on maybe 3 months ago. And I looked at the stats just before flying down here, and we saved 60 gigawatts of power on that global footprint for every device in the world. Benefit of cloud, we get metrics, we can see this information. And that's like over 700 American average homes usage per month, like in saving and power. That's great. I think we should bring more awareness to the customer so we can celebrate that and kind of see that. I don't think, we need to back to every user has to think about like every light switch or every aspect. I think we as an industry need to do more in the product development side, but make it aware to the user of what we've done and what the impact of that is in your environment. So, for example, in our side, we're looking at how can we expose the power usage in your environment? Like, I can tell you the global stat, but if you buy 100 devices, what is your savings you've done over that time so that you can report that in? You shouldn't have to go and put a watt meter on every device. That's not the right approach.
Interesting.
Can concur.
Yeah.
True.
I want to jump to this idea of reusing, right? Because in the AV industry, the circular economy is another topic, and we touched on that when we met. So how can we, as an industry, start promoting some of that reuse of the products, maybe the components of it, right? And are there maybe examples of initiatives that you've been a part of that we can share that are real life? Perhaps it's donations or community programs or whatever it might be that you've seen that have really helped.
So I might kick that one off because when you think to the end of the life cycle and you say, wouldn't it be great for something better than e-waste or whatever to happen then? They have to say, okay, well, so what will that something be? And it's been great starting to see more organizations supporting the circular economy. Actually, as businesses putting themselves out there to make money through that process to be sustainable in that sense so that they can carry on providing that. And if you think, let's say, notionally, I have product that can be, in use for maybe 5 years or whatever in its current application, actually putting the contracts in place at the time that you purchase so that circular economy organization knows that this is coming and has 5 years to plan for it. And sure, if there's 100 devices, maybe not all of them will make it, but, you can factor in those kind of things. I also think the boomerang economy is the other part that we need to have more strongly in place, which is actually saying, do you know who really knows well what's in that product and is best placed to reuse it and reapply it? The manufacturer.
Yeah, and I think on the Cisco side, we obviously take a take-back program and reuse them. And in particular, we put them back into refurbishment and replacement services because that's something that we can control end to end. I think I've been involved in other parts of my life in kind of like the charity donation aspect of it. I think at my personal opinion, I think we need better legal aspects around that. There's a lot of challenges for global companies to, not be liable, when you kind of recycle a product and reuse a product. We don't want to promote a gray market, obviously. That's one aspect of it. But we want to obviously make sure we can use it the right way. But legally, globally, there's challenges, I think, for the legal system to make that more efficient, that we need to work with governments on to kind of make that a more pro process for everyone. But right now, we're really focused on how we can bring that in and refurbish and reuse when someone's device breaks. We want to make sure that we are able to use the products that, if one part's component's broken, but 95% of it's working, we're not going to throw it away. We're going to reuse those components. And we actually have a whole team that breaks down returns. Wow. And then sorts them out and make sure that we can then reuse those products to build up more stock. And so, there's a chance that if you ever return a product from Cisco, that you're using a component that has got lifetime. But these products have, these components have 10,000, hours or 20,000 hours of usage. Mm-hmm. They might not only be used for 1,000. Mm-hmm. We shouldn't be throwing in the bin at that time.
I'm very interested in hearing more about the breakdown and reuse of components aspect because whenever I've kind of asked other manufacturers about it, it's like, maybe it might be said, but it's very, very difficult to actually do. But I'm a bit cynical about the circular economy in AV because I haven't seen enough real life examples of that, right? But always open to be, have my mind changed by real examples. Yeah. And I mean, that's something that I've found as well, us doing our kind of version of that. But we had a program called Bring Out Your Dead. And it's like when you come to an integrator can come and be picking up new product. But if they've decommissioned stuff, I mean, we say if it's from us, but we'll take anything, stockpile, we've got space. But once you start breaking it down, it's like trying to find people who can reuse those components. It's not going to happen, basically, unless you are doing like you called it a boomerang program that's actually going back to the manufacturer. I think it's...
But there are some components which you actually can't reuse as well, which should be reused. But there are reasons if a product has been in a government organization, things of memory, things and stuff like that, even though you can you can give them all the evidence you need to say that you can never recover anything from this. They're a process where you have to destroy. And that's a little bit of a shame, I think. I think we have to look at that a little bit. But like, that's there is still a majority we can. But I think back to Nathan, to your point, like, I think it works at Cisco because we have such a global scale. We can do that scale at the right. It is costly, but we can do it across more than AV. It's like using the same team that does networking, security, and all that. So we probably have an advantage there that we can kind of scale that in the right way because it is a costly service to do that.
Exactly. And I think, as you said, that you come to a point where there are certain things you can't address. And it's the classic case of saying, don't let perfection be the enemy of good, and recognizing that the more that you can do, the better. And I'm just going to, back to your point, Nathan, that, any given organization can't do this all themselves. You are starting to see organizations, I'll name a couple of them, Seconomy, Planet Arc, and so on, who are actually just really focused in this area generally. And they are recycling, redeploying all sorts of things. It might be office chairs, it might be this and that. Some of this stuff's been happening around us for a while. Mm-hmm. So I think it's actually developing those capabilities amongst organizations who already know what it means to say, oh, you've got one of these, is there a market for that? Recognizing that you don't have to solve the entire problem yourself by any means. But again, also trying to push that forward and say, okay, back to wishy-washy aspirational specs and so on, saying, there shall be a circular economy solution embedded, that's probably not going to happen. Getting the buy-in at client level to say, yes, that's important to me. I do want that. We will assess that when we come to the point of tender. When the main contractor in a design and construct contract says, oh, we can save you some money if we don't do this, I'm going to push back and say, no, I want it. There's always that process of development to get to the point where you genuinely can achieve the outcome. And I guess particularly from our point of view as, designers and specifiers, it's so important to be realistic in that way. Aspiration is wonderful, but meaningful outcomes is better.
Yeah, and I think we haven't really hit the nail on the head from the sounds of it from an e-waste perspective. So there's a gap. So if anybody wants to do a startup, I think there's a huge opportunity there. But I was just reading a really interesting stat today. There's close to 500,000 tons of e-waste every year produced, right? And that's expected to grow by, I think, another 30 to 40% by 2030. So if we want to get to, net neutral by 2050, we're kind of going backwards a little bit. But speaking of recycling, and you guys kind of touched on it a little bit, I guess, can we just talk about that from the standpoint of, how do we manage the e-waste safely in Australia? Let's talk specifically perhaps for Australia. Any innovative approaches that you've seen perhaps in the last couple of years?
I can jump on this one. So like when, what you're talking about, e-waste a couple of years ago was the fastest growing waste problem in the world. And I don't think that batteries and EVs are they're going to increase that speed. And actually it's going to very much eclipse our little old industry by comparison. So there'll be some kind of, overarching processes that need to happen there. But whether they translate well to smaller scale electronics will be totally, we won't know yet. But we went looking for, I guess I in my previous life, I went out to the e-waste management company that we were working with, and I was kind of like there to see how they're processing. And I was very surprised when I got there, and I was like, it's just a warehouse with stuff in it. And I was like, oh, what happens now? And they're like, oh, well, we bundle up all the screens and then we ship them to whoever wants to buy them. And it's like, what do you mean? And I'll be like, oh, well, we used to sell them to China. Now we sell them to Malaysia. They're about to ban that. So then we're going to sell it to Thailand. I was like, okay, all right. So it's like, I'm not saying at all, I don't think it's fair to say that like export, that there isn't a valid and good e-waste management program export business, right? But it is completely opaque to somebody in Australia. Yes, it's very expensive to kind of go and audit this kind of thing. There's all sorts of dodgy practices that happen everywhere, including in Australia. So we really took the approach, I guess. I kind of saw that was a bit put off by that, and then kind of looked at a few other companies like they're all kind of similar. So once we started looking at who we partner with at Technical Audio Group, I wanted to go there. Like I went to a company in Melbourne, like when I was on a business trip there, I visited, and they actually had a actual e-waste line. Like they had shredders, they had optical sorters, they do like air sorting as well. I'd done a Udemy course recently just to brush up on like what a line looks like. And so they were like really trying. And like I said, like this is where this kind of it's messy business comes from, because you go there and like they're trying and it's so messy still. But so that was one particular company that we were looking at. But I mean, they're down in Melbourne, so we've got to ship our stuff to Melbourne. They have a partner in Sydney. But then there was another company that was very interesting. And I think I spoke about these guys last year, but Mint Innovation. They're a startup originally from Auckland, I think, who use chemical processes to break down mainly circuit boards. Like that's the feedstock they want. They want to get the gold, the copper, and the tin out of gold, silver, and tin out of PCBs, basically. And so they use organisms that have like naturally evolved in tailing ponds of mines, and they use their properties to basically leach a specific material out of I guess this like sludge they make. So they basically grind up the PCBs, get this like real messy sludge, and then run them through these multiple processes. I mean, it's a real facility. It's in Fairfield. Wow. We went out to check it out. So we've been like working with them. The issue with them right now is that they need 2.5 ton of like pretty clean PCB, which is like what our breakdown facility's little first project is. It's like, let's just, they call everything that's on a PCB furniture, like resistors, caps, whatever. They're just like, we don't want any of that stuff. It's like, that's really nice that you don't want that stuff, but it takes a long time, a lot of labor to get that out. So they do their best. Yeah, you go there and it's like they've got this really like cutting edge technology. There's a really, really good marketing video that everyone should check out on YouTube. But it's a real thing. They're scaling up. But right at the front of the shredding line are humans with hammers, just banging stuff off. And like that's kind of the thing that we're like, I guess that's the beauty of working for a company who just like, they're like, I don't care if we burn a little bit of money. Let's try something. So that's what our breakdown line kind of is there for, is like, all right, we've got 1 ton of PCB already. We need another 1.5 tons. Let's just break it down, clean it up for them, give it to them, and then we'll know. Because the reason we need 2.5 ton is because we need them to do one run through and get a percentage of what the various materials are from the AV industry's PCBs. So, like we got a very, we're just going to call it AV industry e-waste on aggregate. But then we'll know. And then we'll know whether the juice is worth a squeeze or not. And so that'll be a project probably for the next 6 to 12 months. But yeah, I mean, it's just trying to find those initiatives, and because it is kind of bleak.
Yes.
So I think when you loop it back to like end-to-end solution here, like the reason why that's so hard to do is because use a garbage in, garbage out kind of a saying here. But like if we're making bad products that are really hard to break down with the right material, it's really hard for these companies to even make impact there. Yeah. So we have to look at it as an end-to-end solution, and then like we should be looking at like how we're using the right materials that can be broken down easily enough, because then I think we can improve those processes even more. And so I think that's something that maybe is too siloed right now, away from the whole end-to-end talk track, and we need to bring that in to look at like how do these companies in that space who are really innovative looking at that. I love the story of like using natural organisms to like break down materials.
Hell of a story.
Like,
hey.
Yeah, like how do we bring them into the conversation earlier, so when we design products that they actually can be easily then processed correctly in the right way. That's where we really hit real innovation to be end to end, in my opinion.
Amazing. Pete, you want to add something to that?
No, I think the guys have really got it covered.
And I think any questions in the audience? Oh, yes, we've got some questions over there.
One of my things when I was an installer was basically the amount of packaging that we'd unpack stuff, and it would be a box within a box within a box.
Yep.
Then it'd be a bag, then it'd be this, and then it'd be that. And you just end up with this big pile, and you'd have this, a small device. And it was just incredible, And I think for me, that's, if there's some way that can be reduced, would be absolutely amazing. The second thing for me as well is an awful lot of equipment's made in China. Now, China's one of the biggest users of coal, gas-fired power stations. So obviously there's an awful lot of equipment that's being used using coal or gas. So like, it's great that you know, you're looking at how stuff's manufactured, but I think for me also, like, how is that power generated to manufacture those devices? Yeah.
I just want to jump in on that. China might be the biggest user of coal and gas in the world, but it's also the biggest, I guess it's the area. They've also grown renewable energy more than any other nation in the world as well. So we got to keep that in mind a bit. Like that's the way that whole
Scope 2 comes into play. Like,
yeah.
And like that's where we're like looking at, and Scope 2 means that you are looking at that. You're making sure that a manufacturer you're using is not burning, not using fossil fuel energy to kind of meet those targets in that regard. So not every company in the world has met Scope 2 yet. Some have, some haven't. We publish a report every fiscal year. So actually a new one's coming out in about a month's time. And we tell you how much that target we've met. I know we're roughly 90-ish, but don't quote me on that right now. But we'll have a new impact report coming out soon. On the packaging question, it's so great you brought that up because we were talking a little bit outside about this and we forgot to bring it to the stage here. So like at Cisco, we've done a really big job to get rid of any plastics in every packaging. And then you bring up a really interesting topic, which are around like overpacks. And I've been trying to fight overpacks away. And it's kind of like an interesting aspect because overpack doesn't also helps protect the shipment. And also it hides from like theft as well when you have like plain overpack around the box, because when you think about theft and damages, like also adds to the impact of having to rebuild stuff and reship stuff. But in particular, plastics, like we have tried to remove all of it. I think, I'm not going to say we're 100%, but I think we're like 99.9% of all the collaboration devices at Cisco don't use plastic anymore in the box, unless it's like a particular reason why plastic is needed there, because like a fabric protection, we don't want to get the carbon on the fabric and stuff like that. But it is much better. I actually literally as I came to the flight here, I had one of those photo memory things from my old job, and just like that situation, I remember a job in 2011 and I would just see a picture of a pile of boxes in plastic and I was like oh, that's a bit of a coincidence that just popped up randomly on my feed as on the way down here.
It's a meant to be question. Thank you.
I just have one more thing to touch on the packaging thing because it came up recently. WA have a EPS ban coming into play 1st of July. It's like products manufactured kind of by 1st of July 2025 to be sold. And I kind of was digging into that, right, as the kind of local person looking at sustainability, and the amount of loopholes I found in those kind of legislation was it was too easy to just say, oh, it does. Okay, it was only for B2C customers and not B2C sales and not B2B. So like one of our suppliers completely on the hook for it because they're mostly consumer products, but another, all professional products that are being sold in commercial, like not on the hook at all. I kind of didn't want to tell them that though, because I think that legislation is kind of the only way that some of these things can change on a whole. Obviously, you've got companies who are going to go and do it anyway, but that's the kind of, I don't know, I think that legislation changes need to drive this a lot too. And I was pretty dismayed to find that, I was talking to the suppliers, I'm like, is there not already a ban somewhere else in the world that is as brutal as this? And they're like, not really. Like, yeah, it was quite interesting.
Very good. We got, yes, one more question. We got a few. Okay, one last question, and then we're going to wrap it up with final thoughts.
One, two. Yep. My question is regarding over-specifying in projects. Over the course of 40 years or so, I've been through many generations of AV systems, and in general, integrators and architects and other specifiers, designers, tend to over-specify. And when you ask them, why did you put in a 1,000-watt amp when a 500-watt amp would have done the job perfectly well? Or why did you put in 16 inputs when the customer only required 4? They will generally say, well, how can we expect, or we're anticipating that the customer will want to expand the system in the future, and we're building in the extra capacity. Okay, which raises the question, why are the products that are being specified unexpandable then? The product has a fixed configuration. I mean, look at the microphones we're all holding. That's Shure microphone, for example. I use Shure mics. I can buy 3 different capsules that will all fit onto this same handle. In fact, the microphone has comes apart in 3 pieces. And I can buy all different parts that all fit together, and I can make a customized Shure mic to suit the applications. Why are the products that we specify in AV not customizable and generally not designed for expandability and therefore have to be over-specified by the consultants?
So, speaking as a consultant,
30 seconds, Pete.
so this is some of the work that we just do behind the scenes anyway. And I agree. I mean, I routinely challenge my team when I'm reviewing to say, well, do we really need the amp to be that size? Are we sure we haven't overcooked this? Do we need the speakers to be that rating? And again, there's always a balance there, right? But that's absolutely a discussion. And like you said, it's a balance in terms of cost. It's a balance in terms of what's available in the market. I do think, as Nathan touched on earlier, we have moved into a better era over the last probably 10 years where more and more solutions are more software driven. And so there is more opportunity for features to be turned on via a software key or upgrades to be delivered progressively over lifespan. But I think, again, the motivation so often isn't there, which is why I'm pushing the whole embodied carbon point, because much like neighbors in terms of what's happened with energy consumption and performance, when you give people a metric that is relatively simple to understand and start saying drive that down, then that behavior starts to come through. But yeah, that kind of work we do behind the scenes, a bit like what Rich was talking about, certainly for our team. But I agree, it's very important. And if you don't think about it, it doesn't get done.
Thank you. Thank George, right? Yeah, thank you. Final thought, one key takeaway everyone in this room can apply today and in the coming years.
Oh, on the spot there.
Yeah, on the spot.
Okay. So I think it's about finding a colleague in your business that really is passionate about looking at this and then driving the conversation around the water cooler or the coffee machine to generate that interest upstream in your company. Because I think when people really understand what we're doing and they really get enticed by it, they really then want to understand more and buy into the solution more. So we need the crowdsource, not the hypeware, so to speak, the vaporware that we had maybe 5 years ago, but the tangible aspects we're doing today. How do we get that more exposed into every company so your company cares about it, not just you in this room right now?
Okay. Pete.
Find out how big your building is, multiply it by 25, divide by 1,000 and multiply by the current carbon price. Now, that is absolutely, take it away, calculate it, think about it, and then start to work on saying, how can I reduce that?
Can we post that on the socials, Joey? Yes.
Instagram that.
Yes.
My takeaway is very similar to Rich's, which is find genuine, not greenwashing stories from the industry. They're allowed to be very problematic to start with. They're allowed to be straight up just problematic because that's how we avoid the BS of greenwashing, which is actually our biggest enemy in this kind of world. So, yeah, more or less. Yeah.
Advocacy, measuring, no BS. That's sustainability in AV. Thank you so much, guys. Give these guys a round of applause.
Yeah, thanks very much to the panel. Also, Devyani, thank you so much for doing such a great job.